Everything you believe about discipline in trading is probably making you worse. I know that's a hard thing to hear. I know you came here, maybe, because you've been trying harder, because you've been setting stricter rules for yourself. Because after that last bad trade or that last bad week or that last bad month, you sat yourself down and you said, that's it, no more. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to be better. And you meant it. Every single time, you meant it. And that's exactly the problem. Not the meaning it, the framework underneath the meaning it. The idea that what stands between you and consistent profitability is some version of trying harder, gripping tighter, punishing yourself more efficiently after every loss. That idea, that framework, it isn't just wrong, it is actively working against you. It is building the very habits that keep you stuck. And I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because I've watched it happen to thousands of traders over decades. Smart people, prepared people, people who understood the markets intellectually, who could explain an edge, who could draw the setup perfectly on a chart. And still, they couldn't translate that knowledge into consistent results, not because they lacked intelligence, not because the market was against them, but because nobody ever told them the truth about what trading actually demands from a human being. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Not more strategies, not better indicators, not a new system that will finally be the one that works. We're going to talk about the thing underneath all of that. The thing that either makes everything else work or quietly unravels everything else, no matter how good it is. We're going to talk about the mind that executes the strategy, and we're going to talk about how to actually change it, not with more discipline in the way you've been thinking about discipline, but with something quieter, something more honest, and something that, once you really understand it, feels less like hard work and more like coming home. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you took me years to understand, and I want to give it to you in the next hour in a way that actually lands. Not just as information, as something you feel, as something that shifts something inside you. Because that shift, that's where profitable trading actually begins. Let me start with something that I want you to really sit with. Not just hear, actually sit with. 90% of traders lose money. You've probably heard that statistic before. Maybe you've used it as motivation, I'm going to be in the 10%. Maybe it scared you. Maybe at some point it made you feel defeated. But here's what that statistic almost never comes with, and it's the part that changes everything. The 10% who consistently make money are not smarter than you. They did not go to better schools. They do not have access to information you don't have. They are not more disciplined in the way you probably picture discipline, white-knuckling their way through every session, jaw clenched, eyes burning, refusing to feel anything. That's not what's happening on the other side of that statistic. What's happening is something far more interesting and far more accessible. The traders who consistently pull money out of the markets have developed a fundamentally different relationship with uncertainty. That's it. That's the whole thing, really, if I had to say it in one sentence. They have made peace with not knowing. They have stopped fighting the one thing about trading that can never be changed, which is the fact that the outcome of any individual trade is genuinely, truly unknown before it happens. And I know what you might be thinking. I know that, Mark. I know every trade has risk. I understand uncertainty. And I believe you. I believe you know it intellectually. The question I want to ask you gently, honestly, is whether you know it in your body. Whether you know it in the moment, when the trade is live, when it's moving against you, when you can feel the number in your account changing in real time. Do you know it then? Or does something else take over? Because that gap between knowing something intellectually and actually living it in the moment, that is the gap we are going to spend our time closing today. I want to tell you about two traders. I'm not going to give them names. I want you to imagine them as clearly as you can, because there's a good chance you'll recognize one of them. Picture two people, same trading platform, same chart on the screen, same day, same market, same exact setup. Both of them have a strategy. Both of them have a rule that says, when these conditions align, you enter the trade. The conditions align, the first trader clicks. It's not comfortable, no trade ever really is, but they click. They set their stop, They set their target and they wait. The trade starts moving in the right direction, and then, about halfway to the target, something starts happening inside this trader. The position is up, the profit is real, right there on the screen. And suddenly the mind starts negotiating. What if it reverses? What if I give it all back? Maybe I should just take what I have. The fear speaks first, and the trader listens. They close the trade early, they make a little money, and then they watch jaw tight, stomach hollow as the trade continues exactly where they thought it would go and hits the original target for 3 times what they walked away with. Now picture the second trader. Same setup, same moment, same signal, but this one hesitates. Not because the setup isn't there, it's right there. But something about today feels different. Maybe the news earlier made them nervous. Maybe they had a loss yesterday that hasn't fully healed. Maybe they've been right about the last 3 setups and some part of their mind is waiting for the correction, for the universe to take it back. So they wait. They tell themselves they'll enter on a better candle, and the trade moves without them. 50 points, 100 points, right in the direction they identified, right according to the plan they had. And now this trader feels something worse than a loss. Because at least with a loss, you played. This trader didn't even play. They watched from the sidelines while the opportunity they correctly identified walked away without them. Now here's what I want you to notice about those 2 traders. Neither of them made real money. One took a trade and left most of the profit on the table. The other identified a perfect setup and couldn't press the button. Both of them experienced what I would call technical success. They read the market correctly. And both of them experienced emotional failure. The strategy worked. The human executing the strategy didn't. And this is what I mean when I say that trading is not a math problem. Trading is not a pattern recognition problem. Although patterns matter, trading is not an information problem, although information matters. At its core, at the level where money is either made or lost, trading is a problem of psychology. It is a problem of consciousness, of the relationship between a human mind and the perfectly chaotic, perfectly uncertain, perfectly indifferent environment we call the market. And consciousness, unlike a chart pattern, can actually be changed. That's the promise of this conversation. That's why I want you to stay, because I've seen it happen. I've watched people who were genuinely stuck, not for weeks, but for years, finally see this clearly and transform not just their trading, but in some ways, their entire relationship with how they engage with life's uncertainty. Because the principles we're talking about here, they don't stop at the trading terminal. They go all the way down. Let me give you a way of thinking about something that I believe is at the root of almost every trader's struggle. And I want to use a simple image for this. Think about a thermostat. You know what a thermostat does. You set it to a temperature, and the system works to maintain that temperature. It doesn't have opinions about the temperature. It doesn't get angry when it's too cold. It doesn't celebrate when it hits the right number. It just responds to what's there, comparing it to what it's been set to, and making adjustments accordingly. Now, imagine that your mind, your unconscious mind, the part that runs most of your behavior without asking your permission, imagine that it works a little bit like a thermostat, except instead of being set to a temperature, it's been set to a certain level of financial comfort, a certain expectation of what your trading account should look like, a certain internal image of the kind of person you are, the kind of results you deserve, the kind of trader you're capable of being. That setting wasn't put there intentionally. Nobody sat down one day and decided how much success they were comfortable with. This setting was created slowly, over time, by every experience you had with money growing up, by the messages you received about whether money was abundant or scarce, whether making it was something people like you did or didn't do, whether risk was something to embrace or something to be terrified of. By the first time you felt the sting of financial loss, or the first time you felt the guilt of financial gain when someone around you was struggling, all of those experiences left deposits in your internal thermostat. They set a temperature. And here is where it gets relevant in a very practical, very real way. When your trading account starts to grow beyond that temperature, when it climbs above what your internal setting says is normal, comfortable, safe for someone like you. Something happens unconsciously, invisibly, without your deliberate permission. You start making decisions that bring the account back down to the temperature. You overtrade. You take a setup you know isn't really there. You let a winner run past where you should have taken profit, and then you hold it all the way back to break even and beyond. You take a revenge trade after a loss. None of these feel like sabotage in the moment. They feel like decisions. But underneath, they are the thermostat doing its job. And the same thing happens in the other direction. When the account drops below the temperature, there's a pull, an urgency, a tightening that pushes you toward decisions designed to get it back. Position sizes that are too large. Recovery trades. Desperation. Now, I want you to sit with this for a moment because I think this might be one of the most important things you hear today. Almost every trader I've ever worked with, when they look honestly at their results over time, they find a level, a number, a range. The account seems to orbit around no matter what they do, and they interpret this as a problem with their strategy, or a problem with the market, or a problem with their entries and exits. When really what it reflects is the temperature on their internal thermostat. You can get a better strategy, you can refine your entries, you can improve your risk management, and all of those things matter. But if the thermostat hasn't changed, if the internal setting is still the same one that was installed by years of unconscious learning about what you deserve and what's possible for you, the account will keep finding its way back to that number. The market didn't do that. The thermostat did. So what do we do about it? How do we change the setting? That's exactly what we're going to get to. But first, I want to tell you about something else. Something that I think explains not just the thermostat, but why it's so hard to override it once you see it. There's a documented historical phenomenon that has always struck me as one of the most powerful metaphors for what happens inside a trader's mind. There are stories, real stories, not myths of soldiers who continued fighting wars long after those wars had officially ended. Not because they were told the war was still going, not out of some deliberate strategy, but because the reality they were operating from, the information their nervous system was using to interpret every situation they encountered, had simply not been updated. They were responding to a world that no longer existed, responding as if the old threat was still real, still present, still requiring the same response it had required in the past. And from inside their experience, they were doing exactly the right thing. Their behavior made perfect sense given what they believed about their environment. The problem wasn't their response. The problem was the map they were using to understand what was happening around them. Now think about this in terms of your mind and your trading. When you sit down at your trading terminal, you are not just analyzing a chart. You are a whole human being bringing the entire history of your experience to that screen. Your nervous system, which has been learning about the world since the moment you were born, is not just watching the market. It is also underneath, in the background, constantly running threat assessments, checking the environment for danger, comparing what it sees to what it has learned to fear and what it has learned to want. And the crucial thing is this: many of those assessments are being run against beliefs that were formed in contexts that have absolutely nothing to do with trading, beliefs about what it means to be wrong, beliefs about what other people will think of you if you fail, beliefs about whether you fundamentally deserve financial success, beliefs about whether money is safe to have, or whether people who have it are the kind of people you want to be. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a trade setup and a threat from childhood. It doesn't know the difference between a stop loss being hit and the experience of being told years ago that you weren't good enough. It runs all of it through the same ancient machinery, and it produces responses that feel, in the moment, completely rational, that feel like trading decisions but are actually responses to old data, old maps, wars that ended a long time ago. This is why you can know, with complete intellectual clarity, exactly what you should do and still not do it. This is why you can read every book, memorize every pattern, build a strategy that genuinely has edge, and still sabotage it at the execution level. Because at the execution level, you aren't just executing, you are also simultaneously navigating all of that old territory. And the solution is not to try harder. You cannot brute force your way out of an unconscious process. You cannot white knuckle your way past a nervous system that believes it is keeping you safe. The solution is understanding. Deep, compassionate, honest understanding of why the patterns are there, what they were originally trying to protect, and what it would mean, truly mean, to let them update. This, I want to be clear, is not weakness. It is not therapy dressed up as trading advice. It is the most practically profitable thing I know, because the trader who understands themselves, who has actually sat with the honest question of why do I keep doing this, and found a real answer, that trader has an edge that no indicator can replicate, a personal edge, an edge that is uniquely, permanently theirs. So let me now start talking about some of the specific things that profitable traders actually do differently. Not the surface behaviors, not they follow their rules and they manage their risk, but the deeper truths underneath those behaviors. The actual principles that produce the consistency everyone is looking for. The first one I want to talk about is what I'd call the practice of probability. And I want to be very careful here, because this is one of those concepts that almost everybody in trading nods along to and almost nobody actually lives. Here is the intellectual version. You know that no single trade can tell you whether your strategy works. You know that any given trade can win or lose, regardless of how good the setup is, because the market is inherently probabilistic. You know that your edge, if you have one, reveals itself over a large enough sample of trades, not in any individual instance. You know all of this. Now here is the question. Do you feel that way? In the moment? When the trade is live and it's moving against you and your stop is getting close and your chest is tight, do you feel it as one data point in a statistical sequence? Or do you feel it as a verdict on your competence, your intelligence, your worth as a trader, and maybe even as a person? If you're being honest, it probably feels more like the second one. And that's not a character flaw. That is a human nervous system doing what human nervous systems do, assigning meaning, protecting identity, treating uncertainty as threat. But it is the thing that, more than anything else, separates the trader who is stuck from the trader who is free. The profitable trader has done something that sounds deceptively simple. They have genuinely, at the level of felt experience, accepted that any individual trade is random. Not in the sense that their analysis doesn't matter. It matters enormously in the aggregate. But in the sense that this particular trade right now has an outcome that is genuinely unknown, and they are at peace with that. They have done the inner work, and it is work, real work, to actually arrive at that peace, not just mouth the words of it. Let me give you an analogy that I find enormously helpful, and it's one I've used for years because I think it captures the principle better than anything else I've found. Think about a casino. A casino running a game of blackjack doesn't care about the next hand. It doesn't get anxious when a player at the table has a good run. It doesn't get excited when it wins 3 hands in a row. It has no emotional relationship whatsoever with any individual outcome. Why? Because it understands its edge. It knows with mathematical certainty, based on the rules of the game, that over enough hands, over enough players, over enough time, the distribution of outcomes will produce a profit for the house. The edge is real. The edge will express itself. But it expresses itself over a sample, not over any single moment. So the casino's attention is not on individual outcomes. Its attention is on the system, on making sure the game is run correctly, that the rules are followed, that the conditions for the edge to express itself are maintained. A bad night doesn't shake the casino's commitment to opening the following morning. A lucky player doesn't make the casino abandon its rules and change the game. You are the casino. The market is the player. And your job, your actual job, when you strip away everything else, is not to predict what the market will do next. Your job is to know your edge, to apply it consistently enough that it expresses itself across a meaningful sample, and to not let the emotional noise of individual outcomes corrupt the process through which that expression happens. When traders ask me, how do I become more disciplined? What they're really asking most of the time is, how do I get myself to follow the rules when every part of me wants to break them in this specific moment? And the honest answer is that willpower in that moment is not the tool. The tool is understanding. When you genuinely understand, not just intellectually, but with your whole body, that the individual outcome doesn't matter, that you are managing a probability distribution across a sample of trades, that losing this particular trade is not a problem, but a normal statistical occurrence that your edge already accounts for. When you understand that, the impulse to override the system becomes much quieter because it loses its fuel. The fuel for impulsive trading decisions is the belief that this trade is the one that matters, that this outcome will tell you something true and final about whether you're a good trader. Remove that belief. Really remove it. And you remove most of the emotional charge that drives bad decisions. Now, I want to talk about something that I think is one of the great paradoxes of trading, and it's one that I find endlessly fascinating precisely because it runs so completely counter to what most people expect when they start. The paradox is this: the more you try to control the outcome of a trade, the less control you actually have. I want to say that again because I think it deserves to land. The more you try to control the outcome of a trade, the less control you actually have. Think about what happens when a trader gets into a position and starts trying to manage it based on fear. They move the stop loss away from price because they don't want to be stopped out. The market touches what would have been the original stop and then turns around and goes in their direction, and they think, see, good thing I moved it. But that's not skill. That's a single outcome confirming a bias. Because the next 5 times they move the stop, the trade continues against them, and the loss is twice what it would have been. Moving the stop in fear doesn't produce better outcomes on average. It produces worse ones, because it is trading at the mercy of an emotion, not according to a tested principle. Or think about adding to a losing position. In the mind of the trader in the moment, this feels strategic. The price is even better now. I'm getting in at a lower cost average. But underneath that reasoning, if you look honestly, is very often not strategy. It is the refusal to accept that the trade is wrong. It is the identity protection I talked about earlier. It's the soldier fighting the war that already ended, because accepting the loss means accepting the trade was wrong. And somewhere deep in this trader's psychology, being wrong feels like something much bigger and more personal than a trading mistake. And so they add to the position. And then they add again, and what was a manageable loss that their account could absorb without distress becomes the kind of loss that changes everything. All of this is an attempt to control outcome. All of it fails. Not sometimes consistently, structurally, by design. Because outcome is the one thing in trading that is genuinely not in your control. The market will do what the market will do. It does not consult your position size. It does not read your stop loss and route accordingly. It simply moves according to the collective behavior of every participant in the world, and your presence in it as one trader is less consequential than a single drop of water in an ocean. True control in trading lives entirely in a different place. It lives in the input, not the output. You control how you enter. You control where the stop goes before you enter. You control how large the position is, based on a consistent, tested formula that accounts for the stop distance and the risk you've decided you're comfortable with. You control how many setups per day or week you will consider. You control whether to be in the market at all. These are real decisions, with real leverage over your long-term results. And the profound thing, the thing that feels backwards until you really live it, is that releasing your grip on outcome is what makes this kind of precision possible. When you are not emotionally tied to where this particular trade goes, you can make clear decisions about all of the inputs. When you are desperately, anxiously invested in this trade being right, the clarity disappears. The process goes out the window. You are managing your emotions, not the trade. I've heard people say that profitable trading looks like being cold, like detachment in the way a machine is detached, unfeeling, robotic. That's not what I'm describing. I've met many profitable traders, and they are not robots. They feel things. They experience the market emotionally. But there's something different about the emotional texture of their experience. It's less urgent, less identified with individual outcomes. There's a quality to it that I can only describe as spacious, like they have enough room inside to let the trade be what it is without having to immediately respond to every fluctuation. That spaciousness is not something you manufacture. It grows naturally and organically out of genuinely understanding probability, out of genuinely accepting uncertainty, out of having made the internal shift from "I need this trade to work" to "I trust my edge over the long run," and this is just one expression of it. And that shift again is a practice. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. And when it does, the experience of trading changes fundamentally. Here's another truth I want to share with you, and this one is about consistency, not account consistency. We'll get to that. But mental consistency first, because this is the sequence that matters. A profitable trader's account doesn't become consistent before their mind does. It's always the other way around. Consistency appears in the results because consistency already exists in the thinking, in the relationship between the trader and their strategy, in the way they show up to the process day after day. Not perfectly, nobody shows up perfectly, but with a quality of steadiness that doesn't depend on recent results. What I mean is this. Let's say you have a strategy that genuinely has an edge. Let's say that when you run the numbers honestly, when you look at a large enough historical sample, this strategy produces a positive expected value. That means that if you apply it correctly, consistently, over enough trades, you will make money. The edge is real, but here's what most traders do with that edge. They apply it correctly for a few trades, and then they have a losing stretch, maybe 3 or 4 losers in a row, which is completely normal statistically, and suddenly they're not sure the edge is real. Suddenly they're tweaking the rules, looking for a variation that would have worked on those last 4 trades. Suddenly they're second-guessing entries. Suddenly they're skipping setups that meet all the criteria because something about today feels wrong. And in doing all of that, they destroy the thing they were trying to protect. The edge doesn't exist in the strategy in isolation. It exists in the relationship between the strategy and the person executing it. A strategy with edge, executed inconsistently, does not produce the results the edge predicts, because you can't measure the results of a strategy you're not actually following. You end up measuring something else entirely, some hybrid of the strategy, and your emotional responses and the results of that hybrid are not what the edge would have produced. I want you to really hear this, because I think it might reframe something important. Many traders spend years hunting for a better strategy when what they need is a more consistent relationship with the strategy they already have. The problem is not usually the strategy. If you've done any reasonable testing, if you have any honest evidence that your approach has worked over a meaningful sample, the problem is almost certainly in the execution. Not because you lack discipline in the traditional sense, but because the relationship between you and the strategy is unstable. It changes based on how recent results feel. It changes based on your current emotional state. It changes based on how much you currently believe in yourself, which changes based on how the account is doing, which changes based on the strategy's current execution. And you can see how quickly this becomes a circular problem with no clean way out. The way out is to separate your identity from your recent results, not permanently. You should absolutely review your performance regularly and update your strategy when honest analysis suggests it needs updating. But in the moment of execution, your job is not to evaluate whether the strategy is good. Your job is to follow it, to trust the process, to be the casino. And that trust-structured, evidence-based, tested trust is built over time through a specific kind of attention. Not attention to whether you're making money, attention to whether you're following the process. Those are very different things, and conflating them is one of the most common and costly mistakes I see traders make. I want to talk now about something that almost nobody in the trading space discusses, and I think it's one of the most costly hidden problems in this whole arena. I'm going to call it the identity trap. Most people who get into trading, even if they don't articulate it this way, are looking for something more than money. They're looking for confirmation that they're smart, that they can see something other people miss, that they can navigate complexity and come out ahead. There's nothing wrong with any of those desires. But there's a problem when they become the foundation of your trading, because the market is not designed to confirm your intelligence. The market is designed to do absolutely nothing for your emotional needs. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't reward effort in any direct, predictable way. It will give money to someone making a random decision and take money from someone making an excellent one, and do both of those things with the same complete indifference. When you are trading to confirm your intelligence, to prove to yourself and maybe to others that you can do this, losing trades become something other than just data points. They become attacks on the story you're telling about yourself. And when that happens, the response is not the clean, rational, emotionally neutral assessment of a process deviation. The response is defense. The trade is held too long because admitting it's wrong means admitting you were wrong. The strategy is abandoned after a few losses because if the strategy fails, it might mean you're not as smart as you thought. New approaches are constantly chased because staying with something through a difficult period requires a tolerance for feeling like you're failing. And if your identity is tied to not failing, that tolerance is very hard to sustain. The profitable trader has made a different choice about identity. They have redefined what it means to be good at this. They don't see themselves primarily as someone who predicts the market correctly. They see themselves as someone who manages risk well, someone who follows a process, someone who plays the long game, someone for whom a losing trade is a cost of business, not an indictment of character. This is not a semantic difference. It is an enormous practical difference. Because when your identity is built around risk management rather than prediction, losing doesn't attack your identity, it confirms it. A loss that was properly managed, a loss where the position size was correct, where the stop was honored, where the process was followed, that's not a failure. That's the job done well. And when losing doesn't attack your identity, you can be wrong quickly, cheaply, and unemotionally. And that ability to be wrong quickly, cheaply, and unemotionally is one of the most valuable skills a trader can have. There's a saying I've always found resonant in this context: cut your losses and let your winners run. Everyone has heard it. Almost no one does it. And the reason is exactly this identity issue. Cutting a loss requires admitting the trade is wrong. Admitting the trade is wrong for someone whose identity is tied to being right is painful in a way that has nothing to do with the money. So the loss is not cut. It's held. It's rationalized. The story changes. It'll come back. It's just a temporary move. And meanwhile, the damage grows. And then, ironically, when a trade goes right, there's almost an urgency to take the profit before it can be taken away, before the market can prove that you didn't deserve it. And so the winners are cut short too, and the result is the classic losing pattern. Small winners, large losers, accounts steadily declining despite a reasonable win rate. All of this from identity, from a definition of yourself that the market challenges every single session, the practice of rebuilding that identity of genuinely, sincerely starting to see yourself as a risk manager rather than a predictor. That's not something that happens from reading about it. It happens from deciding it repeatedly and behaving accordingly even when it's uncomfortable. It happens from taking a loss correctly, quickly, cleanly, exactly, at your predetermined exit and acknowledging that as a good trade. Not a pleasant trade, not a profitable trade, a good trade. A trade where the process was honored. That acknowledgement, done honestly and repeatedly, builds a new identity over time. An identity that the market cannot attack because it is built on process and not outcome. I want to address one more misconception before we move into what any of this looks like practically. And this one is about the edge itself, about what it means to have an edge in the market. Because I think the common understanding of this is wrong in a way that costs traders an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering. Most people, when they think about having an edge, think about it in terms of win rate. They want a strategy that wins more than it loses. 60%, 70%, as high as possible. The idea is that if you're right most of the time, you'll make money. And while that's not completely wrong, a high win rate with reasonable risk management does work. It's also far from the only path. And the obsession with win rate creates some specific damaging habits. Let me tell you about a different way to think about edge. Edge, in its most accurate definition, is not about being right more often than you're wrong. Edge is about the asymmetry between what you lose when you're wrong and what you gain when you're right, multiplied across enough occurrences of the strategy. Those are two completely different things. There are traders, consistent, long-term, profitable traders who are right less than 40% of the time, who take more losing trades than winning ones in most months. And yet they make money consistently. How? Because when they're wrong small. Because they honor their stops with complete fidelity, so every losing trade costs them exactly what they planned for it to cost, no more, no less. And when they're right, they stay in. They let the winners develop. They trust the process enough to hold through the normal fluctuations of a trade moving in their direction. And the result is that the few trades that really move, the trades that go 2, 3, 5 times the initial risk, make up for all of the small losses many times over. This is a completely different game than the one most traders think they're playing. When you understand this, the meaning of a losing trade changes entirely. A losing trade in this framework is not a failure. It is the cost of finding out whether this particular opportunity is one of the ones that will run. Every losing trade is essentially a small fee you paid to discover that this was not that opportunity. And you already budgeted for that fee. It was part of the plan. The plan doesn't break because of it. Think about how different that feels from the approach most traders bring to losses. The guilt, the self-recrimination, the analysis of what went wrong, the hunt for a way to have avoided it. And sometimes that analysis is useful, sometimes there are genuine process mistakes worth examining, but very often, the trade was just a losing trade. The setup was valid, the execution was correct, the market simply moved against the position, which it is always free to do, and the stop was hit, and the predetermined loss was taken, and the next trade is available. That's all. The loss was not meaningful in any way beyond its impact on the statistical sample. It was just the cost of the fee. When that genuinely becomes how you experience losses, not as something you're telling yourself to feel, but as something you actually feel, trading becomes a different activity. The weight lifts. And I say that not hyperbolically, but from having watched it happen, from having experienced some version of it myself, from having seen traders who carried enormous amounts of pain around their practice find a way to set that pain down. The market does not punish you when you lose. It simply moves. The punishment is something you add yourself, and you can choose to stop adding it. So let me bring all of this into the practical, because I believe in ideas that can be used, and everything I've shared today is only as valuable as what you do with it. I want to give you 3 specific practices, not a system to overhaul, not homework that will take weeks to complete. 3 small daily habits that, if you actually do them, will begin building the foundation of a different kind of trader, the kind we've been talking about. The first one is what I'd call the pre-trade audit. Before you enter any position, before you click the button, I want you to stop for 20 seconds and ask yourself 3 questions. Not about the chart, about yourself. The first question is, am I taking this trade from clarity, or am I taking it from fear of missing out? Clarity feels open. It feels settled. There's a quality of, yes, this meets my criteria, without urgency, without grabbing. Fear of missing out feels different. It feels rushed. It feels like if you don't move right now, it'll be gone. It feels like the decision is being made by the price movement rather than by your process. The second question is, if this trade loses, if the stop gets hit and I take the full planned loss, am I genuinely okay with that? Not, will I feel good about it? Will I be okay? Will I accept it as the cost of the fee, as the natural expression of a probabilistic process? Or is there something in me that needs this trade to win? If the honest answer is that you need this trade to win, if there's desperation, if there's a sense that this loss would mean something beyond its financial impact, that's important information. It doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't take the trade, but it means you should take it with awareness and with particular care around your stop. The third question is, am I prepared to let the market be right, even if it means I'm wrong? This sounds almost philosophical, but it's very practical. It means, if the trade goes against me, am I willing to accept that? Not just accept the stop technically, but actually accept that the market moved differently than I anticipated, and that this is not a problem, and that the strategy is still valid, and that the next setup is still available? Or am I going in with a hidden agenda, an expectation that the market will confirm my view and a plan to fight it if it doesn't? These three questions don't take long. They take 20 seconds. But doing them consistently builds something over time. It builds self-awareness. It makes unconscious patterns visible. And visibility is always the first step toward change. The second practice I want to offer is what I call the sample size journal. Most traders journal their trades individually. After each trade, they write down what they think went right or wrong. And while there's value in that, it has a significant downside. It encourages exactly the single trade thinking we've been talking about breaking. It treats each trade as a separate, meaningful event. I want you to try a different approach. Instead of reviewing trades one by one, review them in batches. Pick a number. 20 trades is a good starting point, and instead of analyzing each one individually for meaning, wait until you have 20, and then ask different questions. Not what went wrong in trade 14, but in this batch of 20, did I follow my process? Was my position sizing consistent? Did I honor my stops? Did I take every setup that met my criteria, or did I skip some? Did I exit winners prematurely? The goal of this review is not to find the perfect trade you should have made. The goal is to measure process fidelity, to assess, am I actually running the strategy I think I'm running? Because very often, there's a gap between the strategy a trader thinks they're executing and the behavior they're actually producing. And seeing that gap clearly across a sample, not just one bad trade, is enormously powerful. When you start measuring yourself against process rather than outcome, something in your identity starts to shift. You stop being the trader who had a bad day and start being the trader who executed well this batch, but skipped 2 setups out of fear. Those are very different self-perceptions, and the second one is both more honest and more actionable. The third practice is the most personal, and I want to offer it gently because I know it might feel a little unexpected in this context. I want you to do what I'd call a belief inventory. At some point, not while you're trading, not while the markets are open, but in a quiet moment when you have some privacy and some honest attention available, I want you to write down what you actually believe about money, not what you think you should believe, not the rational, intellectual position you'd give if someone asked you in a podcast interview, what you actually believe in your gut, in the quiet. Do you believe that substantial money is something that people like you have? Or does it, on some level, still feel like it belongs to other people? People who grew up differently, who have some quality you weren't given, who somehow deserve it in a way that you're still working to prove. Do you believe that losing money is a direct reflection of your worth as a person? Not intellectually, I know the intellectual answer. In your gut, when you take a significant loss, what does it mean to you? What story does the loss tell you about who you are? Do you believe that trading success is sustainable for you? Not sustainable in theory. Sustainable for you, specifically? Or does some part of you expect that eventually the luck will run out, that you'll give it all back, that this isn't the kind of thing that lasts for someone like you? I know these questions can feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is actually important data. The places where the questions are most uncomfortable are almost always the places where the most relevant beliefs live. And seeing them, really seeing them, naming them, acknowledging, oh, that's what I believe. That's what I've been operating from. That visibility is transformative. Not immediately and not easily, but reliably. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. And once you see it, you have a choice. For the first time, really, you have a choice about whether to keep operating from that belief or to start slowly, gently, evidence by evidence, building a different one. Let me bring this full circle now. Let me come back to where we started. We started with the question of discipline, with the idea that maybe discipline, as you've been practicing it, has been making you worse rather than better. And I want to revisit that claim now at the end of this conversation with everything we've covered between here and there. What I was pointing to is this: the kind of discipline that most traders are trying to practice, the kind that involves gripping tighter, trying harder, punishing yourself for deviations, muscling your way through the emotional turbulence of trading. That kind of discipline is fighting a battle in the wrong direction. It is trying to override a psychological reality rather than understanding and working with it. And psychological reality, when you try to override it without understanding it, has a way of finding other outlets. You suppress the fear in one place, and it shows up as recklessness somewhere else. You force the discipline in the morning, and it collapses into impulsivity by the afternoon. The effort is real, but it's effort aimed at the symptom, not the root. What I've been describing today is a different kind of discipline, a quieter kind, a kind that looks less like control and more like clarity. It's the discipline that comes from genuinely understanding probability so that individual outcomes lose their emotional charge. It's the discipline that comes from genuinely accepting uncertainty so that you can act with precision on what you know without being paralyzed by what you don't. It's the discipline that comes from a clean, honest, updated relationship with yourself, with your beliefs about money, about worthiness, about what success means, so that the market's movements are no longer running up against ancient, unexamined fears. That kind of discipline is sustainable. It doesn't feel like restriction. It doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels, when you have enough of it, like freedom, like being able to do what you know you should do, not because you're forcing yourself, but because you genuinely want to, because you understand why, because the practice makes sense all the way down. I want to say something to you that I mean very sincerely. You are not undisciplined. You are not unlucky. You are not broken in some fundamental way that makes profitable trading impossible for you. You have been given a framework by trading educators, by popular trading culture, by the entire industry built around the idea that the right system will solve everything that was always incomplete. You were handed a mechanical solution to a psychological problem. You were told to focus on the outside when the real work is on the inside. That is not your fault, but it is your opportunity, because now you know where to look. The market isn't punishing you. It's not personal. It's not waiting for you to prove something before it lets you win. It's just the market, vast, indifferent, constantly moving, perfectly honest in its own strange way. It will give you back exactly what your psychology allows you to receive from it. And that psychology is not fixed. It was built over time by experience, and it can be rebuilt over time by different experiences and different understanding. The shift I'm describing from the trader who fights themselves to the trader who understands themselves doesn't happen in a day. I won't pretend it does. It happens through the practices we talked about, through honest self-examination, through the willingness to look at what's really happening under the surface of your trading decisions. It happens through a lot of small moments of choosing process over ego, clarity over identity protection, long-term vision over short-term emotional comfort. But I promise you this, it does happen. And when it does, the experience of trading transforms. Not because the market changes, because you do. And The you that shows up to the terminal on the other side of that transformation, the one who has genuinely made peace with uncertainty, who has rebuilt their identity around process rather than prediction, who has updated the thermostat, who has stopped fighting the old wars that trader has access to the market that the previous version never did. That's who you are on your way to becoming, not someday, not if. You are on your way there right now because you are asking the right questions, because you are looking in the right direction. The market will always be uncertain. Every single session, every single setup, every single moment of live price action, the outcome is genuinely unknown. And for most of trading history, that uncertainty has been framed as the enemy, as the thing to overcome, to predict, to defeat. I want to leave you with a different framing. The uncertainty is not the obstacle. The uncertainty is the whole point. It is what makes the edge possible. It is what makes the trade possible. It is what creates the space within which a consistent process can express itself as consistent results. Without uncertainty, there is no market. Without the not knowing, there is nothing to manage. The uncertainty is the environment. Your environment and your job is not to eliminate it, but to learn to move within it with precision, with clarity, with the kind of deep, earned equanimity that comes from genuinely understanding what this game actually is. You're not trying to be right. You're trying to be consistent. You're not trying to control the market. You're trying to control your relationship with the market. You're not trying to avoid losing. You're trying to manage losses so that the wins, when they come, can actually express the edge. That's the game. That's the real game. And it's a game you can actually win. If something in this conversation landed differently than what you usually hear about trading, if something here named a struggle you've been carrying without language for it, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Not because it helps the numbers, though it does, but because there is something that happens when you articulate a thing you've been struggling with privately. Something shifts. The act of naming it makes it real in a new way, and real things can be worked with. Real things can change. If this is the kind of conversation you want more of, if this feels like the right room for you, there's a subscribe button somewhere on this page. Use it only if this resonates. Only if you're interested in exploring the inner game, in understanding what trading actually demands of a human being, in doing the real work underneath the strategy work. That's what this channel is for. That's the only thing I'm interested in talking about. Take care of your mind, do the honest inner work, trust the process you can actually measure, and remember the goal was never to be right. The goal was always to be free.